My name is Lorinda. I have a company, it's called Grants Inc. And what we do is we provide training, education, workshops, things of that nature. And we do grant writing for nonprofits and social entrepreneurs, some for-profits. So I've been doing workshops with the center for a long time. So today's kind of like a bittersweet thing because it's like our last workshop together. So it's kind of sad, but I do love to teach workshops and we'll continue to do workshops outside of this one. So my contact information is at the end so we can kind of keep this moving forward. But today what the goal is we're going to talk a little bit about grant reporting, what that process looks like. And then we can definitely talk about what are some tips and tricks that you can use when you're doing your own grant reporting. And if you have any questions or any specific grant reporting questions, if you have already done this, that have come up and you've been confused or you don't know how to answer, definitely feel free to pull those up and I can give you an idea of how to answer the questions because there is a really like specific purpose to grant reports and there's a certain way you want to answer things when possible. So before I get into that, let's just go around the room and introduce ourselves. That would be wonderful. We could start with Sarah, actually, if you don't mind.
Sure. Hi, I'm here with the center today, but I also run a seafood education nonprofit, Soraya Films, and I'm working on a grant report as we speak. So I'm very excited to be here.
So let's see, next we have Greg.
Hi, I'm Greg Havis. I'm a published writer, a copywriter, and marketing consultant. And I'm going to be starting up probably next month a nonprofit. I'm getting ready to file for my program. It's called the Top of the Middle program, although the program may change. I've conducted it for about 10 years in Broward County Public Schools for about 3,000 at-risk and special needs youth. And while I've written everything a million times, never written a grant before, and I'm not too familiar with grant reporting. So Josephine Diamond, a friend of mine, asked me to sit in on this. She said it would be important and that you guys are really smart and I should listen and ask a lot of questions. So.
Oh, well, tell her thank you for sending her. And yes, any questions you have, feel free to ask. I will try to kind of go through what's grant related, which is kind of what you do to get the money, and then what's reporting related, which is what you do after you get the money, which is probably more work than to get the money. It depending on who your funder is. So I'll kind of go through both just so that you can, so we can be on the same page. So any questions, definitely let me know. Good to have you. So next we have Barbara.
Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara from Dream and Green. We're a nonprofit that focuses on environmental education. I apologize, I'm going to be off camera because I'm at my son's soccer practice. I'm trying to multitask. So, but this is really important where I'm working on a bunch of like reports right now. So this is really something I want to focus on. So thank you for having us.
Awesome. So good to hear from you, Barbara. And then we have, I forgot your name, I apologize, but from Silent Victims of Crime. If you're able to say hello, if not, make sure you drive safe.
Hi, no worries. I'm in like the worst South Beach traffic. Like I really gave myself 50 minutes to get home and I'm still at a standstill. But my name is Christina. I'm a recent hire at Silent Victims of Crime. We work with children of incarcerated parents and try and stop the cycle of reincarceration. I just recently graduated from the University of Miami and I'm new to the nonprofit world, but the director, Tinkerbell, really wants me to get into grant writing and we're working on applying to the Children's Trust grant that's coming up. Mm-hmm. So I just thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of get more familiar with what the process looks like.
Awesome. It's great to have you. So definitely the Children's Trust is going to be an extremely intense grant on the reporting side. It's one of the more difficult ones here in Dade County. So you're starting with the big fish, which is good. I think it's good. If you can do Children's Trust, you can do just about anything else. They tend to fall into alignment with government, the way the government operates. So since we have some of us that are doing, I think, foundation grants, and some of us, it looks like we're doing government style. I'll talk about a little bit of both. The government, one thing I can tell you is that anything that's government related is always going to be the most difficult in that it's the most tedious, but in a lot of ways it's the best to follow because they are like the top dogs of this and they are so strict on their reporting requirements that if you can follow that, any other one is going to be a breeze. So we do internally, we work a lot on harder projects first. So we tend to choose for clients the harder grants to apply to first, or the harder reports to start with, because that kind of gives you all the information you could possibly need in order to do the easier ones. So you'll do great. I am more than sure you'll do great. Just read the directions and you'll be good to go. Let me see if I can figure out what happened to my screen here so I can share. Oh, can you let me share, Sarah, please? All righty, there we go.
Sorry about that.
No, no worries. Everybody see my presentation here? Yeah, okay, let me minimize this. So we're gonna go through grant reporting today. So to get us started is just to define it. What grant reporting is the process of drafting documents that are provided to funders, right? So those funders, which could be a federal government agency, it could be a private foundation, it could be a corporation, but it's an entity that has given money to your nonprofit. And the idea here is that we have to report back two things. Number one, the activities that you completed during the grant period. And number two, the financial expenditures that your organization incurred during that period. So when you're given grant money, the money is to be used to run a program. Typically, it's a one-year program. There is multi-year funding, but a lot of times it's a one-year program. And you have to report back to the funder exactly what you did with the money from the perspective of how you spent it, and also from the perspective of what activities did you complete during that period. Grant reports are extremely important for funders because when they're giving money to an organization or to a nonprofit, they want to make sure that the money is being used well. From the funder's perspective, there is unfortunately a lot of situations where reports are done incorrectly, or people are spending the money as they should not. So what happens is that becomes a problem for the funders to give money, right? Because they don't know whether or not you're actually going to use the money correctly. And how do you define use the money correctly? We're going to talk about that a little bit later, because that definition in itself can change based on what the funder perceives as impact. So they have an idea of a reason why they gave you the money in the first place, and they want to make sure that was accomplished, but that can change drastically. You can have the same program being funded by 5 funders and reports are going to look completely different, because we really want to speak to what it is that the funder is looking to see. So in generally speaking, our reports are going to be those documents, usually financial and also like a narrative based application. So something you're in written word explaining what you did with the money. So the purpose of a grant fund, like I said, of a grant report, this is our communication tool, the way that funders can understand what you did with the money that was given to you. Aside from reports, there's really not a lot of ways that the funders themselves can see what it is you're doing. I mean, they may have communications with you, they may participate even, let's say, in your programs and services, but they use the reports as their foundation, their justification for giving you the money in the first place. And so they can go back to their people and say, hey, listen, we funded this organization. Look at the incredible work that they did. So that really is the main communication piece. So it is an extremely important document. It includes, like I mentioned before, how you spent the money. So some funders will say, okay, we gave you funding. We're at the 6-month period. 6 months would articulate to, let's say, 50% of the money we gave you. So let's say it's a $50,000 grant, right? And they want a 6-month report. And we're going to talk about the different types of reports that are required. But they want to see that you did spend 50% of the money, and where did you spend it? Did you spend it where you said, or you did it? And if you didn't, why? So it's it's like a communication tool that helps answer all those questions. They also want to talk about your objectives, right? So when you did your initial grant application, and when you're doing a grant application, you're defining what it is, why you need the money, and what you're going to do with the money, but also how you're going to do it. So what are your goals? What's your purpose in your program? And what are the steps you're going to take to get there? And those are considered your objectives. Or sometimes your outcomes depending on the funder, but you have to then use that information to report back, right? And say, okay, we said we were going to accomplish these 3 goals. These were the 10 steps we were going to take to get to those goals. Did we take those 10 steps or not? And if not, why? So you're answering all the unanswered questions, right? So that's really what this is about. Because to think about it, the way the funders are looking at this, they're really interested in knowing that the money was well spent. You are an investment for them. You can also be a risk for them as well, because just like we have to report to our funders, funders have people to report to as well. So they really want to make sure that the money was well spent. And the way that we define that is how we, how we filled out that report and what information we put in there. So there's two main types of reports. Again, this is going to change depending on who the funder is. And just so that we're all on the same page, you have three typical groups of funders. Your biggest funders are your federal government funders. And there's also like local Miami-Dade County government, city government. Children's Trust does fall under government as well, because the funding that they give for youth programs is collected by taxes. So you have your government funders. Then underneath that, you're going to have your foundation funders. So think of the Miami Foundation, think of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? You have these family foundations or community foundations that are donating money. And then you're going to have your corporations, so your Starbucks and your Coca-Cola, for example. Each of them have very different reasons why they give, which we won't really go into today too much, but those are going to be your primary three groups of funders, right? So depending on who your funder is, you can have I say up to 2 to 4 reports, but there's a fifth one that does happen in federal funding that can happen, but you can have typically between 2 and 4 reports each year based on the requirements, right? So that could be a quarterly report. So you're giving them a report every 3 months, right? So 4 times a year. That could be 6-month reports. So you run half your program, then you submit a report, and then at the end you do your final report. Or like I said, in a lot of federal agencies, you're going to have quarterly, plus you're also going to have an end of year closeout report, which is completely separate. Depending again on your funders, these reports sometimes are directly tied with the money. So unless you completed your report correctly, you're not going to get a check, right? So this is how the federal government works. They work primarily on reimbursement. So you may get a $1 million grant fund, but you're not going to see $1 of that money until you've completed your reports correctly. And again, we're looking at 2 types of reports. We're looking at finance to make sure that you spend the money as you said you would. And then we're also looking at program to make sure you accomplish all the objectives that you said you would. So reporting, like I said, it's definitely a big thing, and it's something that's really exciting that a lot of you are looking at this now. I think what happens is a lot of organizations don't look at reporting until, they focus on grant writing first, and then they look at the reporting, but the reporting really is going to make or break a lot of what you do. So it's a really important piece of the pie, so to speak, as far as the whole grant process. It's not just submitting the grant, it's also how do you report it. So, and a lot of work goes into this. And I feel like in most circumstances, organizations may spend more time doing the reports than they're doing the initial applications. So it's definitely an important, super important piece. So these are the gains and the nays. These are the things you want to do and the things you don't want to do. Just a couple of them. There's many different ones, but these are a couple that I thought of. So yay. So something you do want to do is you want to report on the activities that you accomplished, because remember, a grant report really is the opportunity for you to communicate with your funder on what it is that you did during that time frame, right? This is, while it might be a little bit mundane and a little bit difficult as far as having to do these reports and having to draft the paperwork, the good thing about this is that this is your opportunity to let them know about what you accomplished. What were the goals and objectives that you had set out for yourself, for your organization? Did you maybe accomplish more than you thought? Was there maybe an exciting situation that happened? Maybe a person that receives your services had a really good story to tell, or something really wonderful happened. This is your opportunity to report on that and tell them, so they can also get excited about giving you the money, right? And they can get excited as well with you to see, what happened positively during your process, during your 1-year application, right? During your grant period, I should say. So also, this is definitely the time to report on financial expenditures, right? So besides communicating to your funder your accomplishments from your objectives perspective, it's also your opportunity to report on the financial expenditure. So how did you use the money, and were there issues? Because there are circumstances, COVID is a perfect example, where you may have had a plan set in place for how you're going to run your program, right? But then come to find out something changed, right? We had the COVID situation, it changed everybody's programs and services a lot. So this is a good opportunity when you're doing your reporting to let them know if there was a change. One thing that I say that is really important is to have high level management on how your money is being spent. So you need to know where your money is going. When it gets into the financial reporting side of things, which again for the federal government and the Children's Trust is going to be extremely important, is you have to, within your own finances and the way the finances are run within your organization, there needs to be, like, let's say use QuickBooks, for example, there needs to be a differentiation between the money that comes in for each grant fund that you're receiving. So let's say you receive grants from 5 different foundations. In your finances, all 5 need to be documented appropriately. And you need to say, okay, if I bought a pencil, was that pencil from grant A or from grant B? Again, when you get into government grants, this is a lot more important than when it comes to like foundation grants. They don't get into this as much, but definitely having a high level management on how the money is being spent and which expenditure is related to which grant is going to be super, super, super important. And it's also going to help you if you're doing this already and you already have a good management on the finances of the business anyways. It's going to help you when it comes to the reporting part to get these financial reports done easier. So that's just like a good thing about it. So the things you don't want to do is, number one, when you're doing the grant reports, you don't want to ask for new funding. Sometimes that's a mistake that a lot of organizations will make. And sometimes, unfortunately, the grant reports will be due during the same time that you need to reapply. So you have to kind of play with time a little bit. There's ways to kind of avoid that, which is really planning out your activities all year long. But you make it into a situation where you're saying, well, I need to go ahead and, like, there's a grant that's due tomorrow. I need to ask them for funds, but I haven't submitted my report yet. That can be a difficult situation because you don't really want to ask for more funding until you've submitted your report. But sometimes time is not on your side. So but what I would say is try to plan out your activities in a way that you can submit your report and then afterwards request new funds, because it's not always the best time to ask for new funds. Because what will happen is you'll ask them for grant funds that are going to say, we need your report first. Very common situation, happens a lot. The other thing is something that's a bad practice is waiting until the last minute to do the reports or waiting up until the last minute to start collecting data, right? So you ran an entire year program. Let's say you happen to have a 6-month, your 6-month review is done. You have to submit your grant report and it's like month 5 and you're just now getting your information together. That kind of is a bad thing to do. It does happen all the time. It's unfortunately happens a lot. But if you're getting any kind of federal funds, that becomes an absolute nightmare. So we always say that you should really start drafting your reports on a regular basis. When we do federal, and again, I say federal because those are like the big dogs, the most difficult one. We require that clients start to gather all this information related to the reporting a minimum every 2 weeks, if not once a month, so that once you get to your 3-month period, you have all the information, you can kind of review everything and get those reports out the door. So it's a really good practice, generally speaking, to check in on where your program is during the timeline of the 1-year, like the 1-year grant. And like every month have some kind of internal meeting or internal check-in, depending on how your team is structured, to make sure that you are meeting all the markers and doing everything you told the grantor you were going to do. And see where you are in that, because if you go and try to do all this at the last minute, that's where your reports end up being drafted very poorly, and then organizations will not refund you because they don't like what they're seeing. So there's a couple of things that I always say not to do. So before I keep going, let me stop this really quickly and see everybody. Wait a minute, how do I stop sharing? Stop sharing. Okay, so any questions so far before I keep going on? Any thoughts?
Will you be providing us with a comparison of like a poorly created grant report and one that looks better, or like where you can, from the funder's perspective, where they can see where your weaknesses are, where you've tried to cover it up, or I don't know if that's something you can provide.
I mean, I probably could. In this specifically, I don't have a physical like visual to give you because the visual side of it is different for every funder.
Okay.
The biggest thing, but what I can do is I'll have your email address because Sarah will send it to me. So I'll see what resources I have specifically for you because you're doing Children's Trust. So that's going to come up a lot for you. I'll see what information I can have to kind of show you comparisons. But more than anything is you have to look into, and the way to start, right, is really figure out what it is the funder is looking for and make sure you're answering the questions that they're asking. not anything else. Like give them what they want and only what they want. But I can definitely see if I have any resources and email them to you. I'll email it to you by next week.
Okay, I'd really appreciate that. Yeah, because I haven't even really looked at examples, or I don't know if they provide you with some sort of structure for how they want it, or they just say, break down exactly like
Right.
your expenses and your activities,
So yeah, so what they'll do is some of them will have portals. So online portals that you have to have like a login or credentials to get into. And then you're gonna have like boxes and you're gonna just have to fill them out. So think of like a job application type of thing where
Okay.
you're having to fill out the answers. But then they're gonna have sections where there's attachments, right? And the attachments may be an Excel spreadsheet, or it may be like your finances. You may have to download a report from the financial, like from your accountant, to upload in there. So you're kind of building out almost very similar to a job application is what it's going to look like in most circumstances. Other ones will give you like a document, like a Word document, and you have to fill in the questions, answer the questions, fill them in. And then you may have to attach different things, right? Like you may have to attach these same financial documents. So each one will look a little bit different. Children's Trust has a portal. So there's a portal that you'll get really familiar with. They do have a lot of webinars though that you can attend and actually get an idea of how all this works, but it's going to be a portal that you're going to log in and fill out information basically.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I had a quick question. And so every funder is going to tell you when they give you money, this is how we want the report, or they're going to come back later, or like, is it always when they give you the money, they'll say, okay, we expect X, Y, and Z, or does it depend on the funder?
So it depends on the funders. The government will, once you receive your award letter, they're going to say, they're going to give you a playbook basically afterwards. So usually you have to set up a meeting with them, or they'll set up a meeting with you. You'll attend a webinar, and you're given literally a book that's going to tell you exactly what to do, which is good and bad, right? It's good because it's bad because that means a lot of work, right? It's like a whole full-time thing in itself. Now your private funders will usually, let's say like Peacock Foundation, Boucher Foundation, right? Your local funders, they're usually going to tell you when it's due. You can also kind of gauge it yourself based on, when your program started. So when the 12 months are going to end, so you can kind of gauge it yourself. But usually they'll send it to you. Sometimes they don't give you a lot of time. They're going to send you an email. Hey, by the way, your report's due in a month type of thing. But usually if you're tracking your own, start date and end date, you can kind of get an idea. Or there are funders, one specifically in Dade County, that will forget to happen. They forget that they had a report due, and you have to contact them and say, hey, by the way, do we have a report due? Oh yeah, that's right, we do have a report due. Yeah, go ahead and send it to me in a week. That's happened to me on multiple occasions with one local and very popular funder. So what I would say is that most of them will tell you, but definitely keep on top of it yourself. And you think about your start date as in when they said your program starts or what they agreed on. Which sometimes can be different from when you actually run your program, but think about that and start calculating out your own reports. Yeah. And then ask them, hey, when do you want to report by? You know what I mean?
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely. All right. Let's keep going. Let's see if this works. Okay. Go back one. All right, so we talked about the A's and the A's. All right, so timeline and objectives. So when you first complete a grant application, you're going to submit as part of this application, right? So I want you to think about like a college essay, right? It's very similar. When you submit it, part of the application that you're submitting is either going to be a plan of action or a timeline, but it's going to basically give a lay of the land of what you're going to do when during this 1 year hypothetically program, right? So this is going to include objectives, outcomes. It's going to explain to the funder what steps you're going to take to accomplish the goals that you've set for yourself. So what's really important, and then a mark that a lot of people miss, is that whatever you submitted, you're going to have to report back on. So it's extremely important to keep copies of your grant submissions. Many times we've had to do reports to organizations, and the initial grant application that was submitted was lost. That becomes a nightmare because you don't know what it is you said you were going to do. So how are you going to be able to report back? So definitely one of the best practices I can tell you is that when you're sitting down to do a grant report, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, the first thing you should do is actually have the grant application that you submitted. Super important because that's going to have your timeline, that's going to have your objectives, which you're going to have to report on, right? So those proposed timeline. So if you said, okay, my program is a program from January through December, we're going to teach one workshop about 12 months in the year, right? So what is that timeline? When are you going to teach those workshops? All that information becomes your blueprint to your to running your grant program and also to doing your reports. So the information you're gonna look at for that original grant application that you submitted that was approved is, again, the proposed timeline, your plan of action, your goals, your objectives. Those are the items that you want to look at because that's what you're going to report back on. So when you're doing a grant report, this is a very general three-step process, but this is like the three-step process to get you started, right? Number one, oh, wait, here we go. So your step one is, in order to submit quality grant reports, you have to take a look at the proposed timeline or the plan of action and see whether or not you're meeting the markers communicated. So for example, if you had the example I gave you before, if you have a one-year program, January through December, you're teaching one workshop per month, that's 12 per year, right? So if you have to do a quarterly report, let's say in 3 months, at the 3-month mark, you have to submit a report. You need to take a look, and did you teach 3 workshops? Did you teach a workshop in January, February, and March? If you did, great. If you didn't, why? Right? Is it because maybe the grant report's due in the middle of March and your workshop is planned out for, let's say, the last week of March? That's okay. You need to be able to communicate that, but you need to understand where you are in the process of actually running that program beforehand. Like, as far like in alignment, I would say in alignment is a better way to put it, in alignment with the reports. So if it's 4 reports a year, you need to do that check-in 4 times a year. If it's every 6 months, you need to do that every 6 months. They want to see if that timeline that you gave them of your activities that you're going to complete, did you accomplish them? And if you didn't, because it's not just based on accomplishing it throughout the whole year, it's time. Right? Did you do what you said you were going to do month 1? Did you do what you're going to say month 2, 3, 4, like that? So your first step is to compare notes, compare the timeline, the plan of action that you gave in the beginning. You want to compare that with where you actually are during the grant reporting period. Step 2 is you want to use that same information and detail what was and what was not completed during that grant period. So let's say, again, we're looking at that quarterly report. We were, it's March. We should have had 3 workshops done. We've only done 2. What's going on with number 3? Oh, it's because we're going to do it after the report is submitted. Then that's what you communicate. Or no, we had to cancel workshop 3 because some situation happened. Then that's what's reported. So you have to report it based on time. So that's why it's really important to look at what you submitted before and then kind of report what you're doing, there forward. And then step 3, once you've kind of looked at what it is that you said you were going to do, you compare notes to what you're actually doing at that point in time. You're going to start putting pen to paper. You're going to actually start writing out and detailing honestly what was and what was not accomplished during that grant period based on the blueprint that we mentioned before, right? So this is a great opportunity to communicate with the funder how it's going, how your program's going, how you see the program moving forward, what you expect to happen in the next 3 months, 6 months, at the end of the year, whatever it is. Also, when it comes to your end of year reports, this is a great opportunity to communicate to them what you see happening in the next year. And this is how you set yourself up for success to be funded the next year, is you close out your year. I had these 3 objectives, these 3 goals. We accomplished everything. We did better than we expected. We're a program that is successful, and we're a program that there's more need for, right? Like, let's say you found that, and this happens to a lot of clients, that they did a really good job, but they, at the end of the year, they found out there's more people that want to participate in their program. This is a great time to communicate that in your reports. We've had an increased demand for our services, because that sets you up for success to apply for the next year. So here's a couple of pro tips. We have never underestimate. So number 1, never underestimate your successes, right? Or the activities that you have to complete in order to be successful. For example, real life example, we have a client right now that received a grant of $500,000 from Department of Education. Well, in her first report, she says to me, well, we haven't done anything yet. There's nothing to report on. And actually not true. Part of what they had to do was enroll students, which they naturally do because they're a school. That's what they do is enroll students, right? Just the enrollment process, which is something that they have to do all the time. That is an activity that leads to success in their program. So things like enrolling students, things like onboarding, things like let's say you have to hire a staff person, you have to hire new volunteers or bring in new volunteers. Any of those initial steps that you probably see as minuscule and not important, those are very important. And those are things you should report on. We accomplished, we started the process of looking for a new team member. We started the process of bringing in new volunteers. We started communications with partners, whatever it may be, depending on your program. Those things are important, and those are things you want to communicate to the funder that you've done, because it shows that even though they're minuscule, they may seem like minuscule activities. Those are things the funder needs to know, because those are steps necessary in order to be successful in your program. Now, on the other hand, never overestimate, right? You always want to communicate the reality of where your program is, even if there are delays. It's okay that there are delays. This is the real world, right? Maybe you had a plan to have, like I mentioned, those 3 workshops the first 3 months and it didn't happen. Well, maybe the following month you have 2 workshops instead of 1. Life happens, and it's always best to be honest about where you are. At the end of the year, you do want to achieve the objectives, the outcomes that you had said. You do want to be successful, but things happen, and if you're not, that's okay. This is a great opportunity to communicate your challenges and any issues that you may have had. If you've ever seen a grant report, sometimes there's a question that's directly like that. It'll say, what are the challenges you experienced? What are the problems that you experienced? Because the reality is not everything works out as we plan, right? So you never want to overestimate your successes. Like you don't want to, and what I mean by that is you don't want to lie in the report. Like let's say you're supposed to have those 3 workshops, you only had 2. You don't want to lie and say, oh, we actually had 3. No. Be honest with them. We only had 2, but this is our contingency plan. We're going to have the 3rd one at the end of the month. We're going to have the 3rd one, 2 of them next month, whatever it may be. Be honest and communicate where your program actually stands at that point in time. Also understand the results. So there are a number of ways that you can show positive results. This includes data, statistics, anecdotal stories. There's so many different ways that you can communicate the success of your program and project. It's really important to learn how to communicate data, learn what the data is, learn how to communicate it in order to present it in an interesting and different way. I have a client, one specifically, that he uses 2 types of data in every report. One of them is going to be hard numbers data. He actually has like percentages that he puts into place, calculations that he puts into place to show the effectiveness of his program. And he also includes anecdotal stories. This is what my client experienced. This is how this has changed their life. This is what they're asking me for, etc. Right? So both sides of those are important. So there's a lot of different ways. I mean, we could do an entire workshop just on data and statistics, but start thinking about different ways that you can communicate data, because both numbers, statistics, as well as anecdotal stories. So how the client or how their family, if you work with the school, whatever it is, what they felt, how they've changed, how it's changed their life is also equally as important. And I always recommend to use both. And then finally, your final pro tip is that just like how there's a number of different ways to articulate results, there's even more ways to evaluate impact. And this is a really important concept. The way that you evaluate the impact of your program or project may not be the same way that the funder evaluates it. So before you even apply to that grant, you should have gone into a little bit of details. And if you haven't, you can do it after. Figure out what it is that the funder uses to guide them and whether or not this was impactful. Some funders will say, we want to see a lot of numbers, so we want to see that you service like 1,000 people. Other funders will say, we're more interested in how your program affects the life of the student or the life of the participant. Other funders may say, well, we want to know what is your impact in the environment? What is your what are you doing to save funding, or whatever it may be. Understand, and you can do this on their website, getting to know your funder, doing funder research, understand what it is that they are looking for to define impact, right? And once you understand how they define impact, you want to communicate your report in a way that you're speaking exactly to them. If they want to know that you serviced 1,000 people, then that needs to be one of the first things you communicate. We serviced 1,001 people, not even 1,000, 1,001, right? Or if they want to see what effects you had on the environment. These are the effects we had on the environment during this program. Figure out the way, and that's one of the first things you want to communicate in your reports, is something you want to start with. I would say in a lot of ways is what is the way that the funder wants to know, like how they evaluate impact, and how have you done that? So you want to, that's the thing with grant writing in general and with reporting, is you're not reporting on what you see as success. You're reporting to them what they want to hear. Obviously, you want to be honest and truthful. We're not lying here, right? But you need to make sure you're communicating to them in the way that they're going to understand. And that's really what makes a successful report as well as a successful grant proposal in general. So that's it. This is my contact information. I'm going to stop screen sharing so we can kind of talk about this a little bit more in a little bit more detail. Okay. You made it. You made it to your place. Yay. So any thoughts, questions? Has anybody done any reports, and what was it like? What were some of the questions you saw maybe?
Yes, I have a question. So,
Yes.
so I now, especially with some of the private foundations, now they'll send me, I'll ask if there's an end of program report format, and a couple of them have said no, like whatever you want to send me. So this was really helpful because know what you want to send me is not what I want to hear, because
Of course.
that doesn't give me a lot of detail
Yes.
on what to put.
Yes.
So if you have a case like that,
Yes.
I like the tip about going back and looking and just like putting your objectives and goals. What about like pictures
Yes.
or quotes?
Yes.
Combination of all of that. What about
Yes.
challenges? Or should
Yep.
how long or short does something like that be if they're just like, oh, send me, whatever format?
Love it. Love the questions. Okay, so I would say in that circumstance, you're going to want to send 3 to 5 pages. You would want it to be visually appealing. So something like, depending again on how you're submitting it, because if the portal doesn't allow you to submit a fancy PDF, don't. But if it does, absolutely do. You want it to be branded. You want it to look like a proposal or look like a marketing report, right? So we're going to kind of dip into the world of for-profit here and steal from their side, so to speak. They do, for-profits are doing really pretty branded, well-looking reports. So that's what you want to have. A cover page, a really impactful cover page is going to be one that's going to have your background is going to be some kind of picture. Could be your logo, but I would say if you're open to it, do something that shows a visual communication of the impact the organization has. If it's kids in the classroom, if it's something environmental, whatever it is you're doing, right? Have something visual and think about what does that picture mean and what does it communicate. So that would be your first thing. Then you want to have so you're creating almost like a cover page with some kind of a picture, and then your contact information. You want to have in there the date of the program. So this was grant, XYZ grant, and then have your timeline, right? Like it was between January and December, and have that information, fiscal year, and have that information, and then have your contact information, right? So you think about, like I said, like a proposal, right? For your first page. Then the second page is going to be like oh my gosh, what do you call it? Like a table of contents is usually really good, depending on how long your report's going to be. A table of contents will be good. And then you want to talk about what was done. So a little bit about the grant, like the name of your project or program. A very basic summary of it is going to be good. You could discuss. So you want to reiterate like a summary of what your original grant proposal was, but then speak to your objectives, your outcomes, your goals, and what was and was not accomplished. So you want to talk about, again, the same things you mentioned, what your program was, what was accomplished, what challenges you face. I think it's very important. I think sometimes organizations shy from that, but you should definitely include that in there as well. And then also, what trends are you seeing, or what needs are you seeing coming up in the future? That's the piece that really sets you up for continued funding. Because, okay, yeah, you did great this year, but do you really need more money or not? Well, yeah, you do. Why? Because of X, Y, Z. So you could start, you don't ask for the money, but you can tell them about what the trends are that are upcoming. There's a higher demand for our services. We found that more students want to be enrolled or need these services. We've had teachers that are saying they want to be more involved in this. And then throughout the document, depending on the physical layout of the document, you can get as creative as you want to. You could be just like a regular college essay, or you can make it super fancy, like on Canva or something. You would always say definitely put in quotes, because that kind of relates to the anecdotal stories, right? Like what benefits do people actually get? You can also have little blurbs of statistics or data if that's what you're doing to collect. So you could have that kind of scattered around. But yeah, there's a lot of like you can, when they give you the option to just do whatever you want, those are some of the high points I think would be good. Speak to the grant, speak to what it is you asked money for, answer any unanswered questions, and set yourself up for success by communicating to them why it is that you need more money. So you don't say we need more money because this. No, you say that there's a higher demand in this. We've gotten more requests for it. Whatever that may be, whatever serves with what you're doing. There's been a shift in the climate. So now these type of programs are going to be more needed, or whatever that may be, to set yourself up for, hey, listen, we did a good job, right? And there's more need. That's going to set you up to get approved for funding the next year.
Awesome. Thank you. That was super helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that was really great. I forgot to mention, I'm supervising a program in South Carolina, and we got a grant from Duke Endowment, which yeah, and they have not put in a request of what they want in their report, and the report is the program ends in March, so I'm meant to do the report. So this is really helpful for me.
Wow,
But,
so glad.
and Canva is so helpful, particularly like
Canva's great.
really gorgeous. I mean,
Mhm.
is there an extent to which like I'm providing too much information to them?
If you go over 5 pages, it's ridiculous. It's way too much. And I say 5 pages, including a, let's say 6 pages, right? Because you're going to have your cover page, you're going to have your table of contents. So no, I would still say 5, because you don't want to have more than maybe 3, maximum 5 pages of data. They're not going to read through all of this. You know what I'm saying? You don't want this to be some mundane, boring document. And also think about a correlation between the length of your report and the length of your proposal, right? We're doing grant reports for the federal government. They're 1 page, $1 million, and they want 1 page of information. So you know what I'm saying? Sometimes I'm like, yeah, that, which is actually harder, right? So I would say something that's short. If there's really important data and you have some really fancy tables, sometimes it may get a little bit bigger because you want to include a lot of this, info charts, infographics are also really great.
Okay.
Again, keep it branded is nice. But yeah, I would say keep between 5 pages is probably enough.
Can I separate the reporting and then like supplemental information, like such as like photos of the families, photos of deliveries, photos of food evidence? Like I have like charts that I've created of like profiles of each family and like a photo of them all together, because sometimes it's hard to catch this my family in action, so I don't know if that's just frills or if that's something they'd want to see.
So they may want to see it. I wouldn't say definitely don't do it. If you can incorporate it into the document that you're submitting to them, that would be good. So if it's, let's say it's a picture, because I've seen this before. I've seen a layout where you'll have like the picture and then you'll have kind of like a scientific report. We did some work with the NIH for a while, and they would set it up where they would have the justification for the science that they were doing or whatever. So they would have these medical charts, and then they would have like a description at the bottom embedded. And that looks really nice. Visually, that was appealing. So I would say if you can do something like that, like have a really pretty layout and include that, it would be better. But if not, you could definitely include supplemental information. Some people will include, and again, this depends on your funder. The bigger the funder, the less time they have to read through all this. If it's a small family organization, they're going to like the frills more than a larger organization. They rather just like cut to the chase.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. Greg, do you have any questions? I know you're new at all this stuff. Oh man, you're muted again. No.
How about now?
There we go.
I'm getting the hang of this.
Awesome.
I'm just taking it all in and
Yes.
listening to your questions, and you ask good questions. And so I'm writing as fast as you're talking.
Which is very fast because I talk too fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can write pretty fast, but you do go along at a good clip.
It's bad. it's a problem that I've been working on for an eternity and a half to slow down. Recently, somebody called me out on it. Where was it? I forget. Man, hopefully it comes back to me. Somebody, it was like a person I was very humble to even be on the phone with. And their comment was, "You talk too fast." And I was like, "You're right. I'm sorry. Let me slow
Well,
down."
you could tell you're excited about what you do, which is a
I
good
love
thing.
it.
But
Yeah.
it's more enthusiasm driven than just trying to run through it.
Awesome. Yeah, no, definitely. I love what I do. I love what I do, and I love what I do every day more than the day before. And it's exciting. And like even this, when it comes to the grant reporting, it's such a pain point for organizations, and it's so cumbersome, and it can be difficult. And I've had the really cool opportunity that specifically since COVID started, there's been a lot of federal money that came out. So there's a lot of reporting that's required. So I've learned a lot about it recently. And then I was in DC for a while before COVID, and I started learning about it. So it's kind of a cool topic because it's difficult, but we've seen how like we've found ways to plan it out, so it's not as difficult. So to be able to share that to me is fun because I know nobody likes to do these reports.
For formatting purposes, can you cite an example or two of these 3 to 5 page reports that have been submitted that have been really effective, or you thought they were really good, regardless of whether you or someone else wrote them? I mean, I just like to use as a guideline, not that I would.
Yes. I'm actually, let me see if I can find something since I spoke so fast, so we're running good on time. Let's see if I can find you something, because I have a bunch, but I can't necessarily share them. But there's one that I have.
I found two.
Oh yeah, do you want to put those up on the screen so we can take a peek at them?
One funder was suggesting using a common grant report from Washington grant makers.
Okay.
So I just kind of Googled Washington grant makers grant report, and that was like a template that the funder suggested.
Awesome. Do you have it there that we could take a peek at?
Pulling it up.
I'm gonna look up some too.
Yeah, let me share screen real quick. So this is what they gave. So this was kind of specific. The funder also asked some specific questions, but this was kind of just with the narrative and attachments. I don't know if you guys can see it. I can increase the size a little.
My font, staple paperclip. Wow.
It says back when you sent in, I guess,
Yeah.
physical reports. But yeah, I mean, it's essentially everything that Lorinda has been sharing with us.
Okay. So this is interesting where it says here, number 7, dollar amount of this grant, funding period of this grant. I would say one thing I would say when you get to this part, like say with the $40,000 that the foundation gave us, we did XYZ, right? And then don't just throw the number on there, but try to like write it out a little bit. Period of the report covers. Yeah, that's important on the front page. What progress have you made towards achieving the results you described in your proposal during the period? What evidence do you have to demonstrate your success? Yeah, that's the data, right? The data that we have. If you did not achieve your intended results, why not? Challenges you want to talk about? Yep. What do you consider to be the greatest strengths of your work? I like that. What do you consider to be the most important concerns apart from finances currently facing your organization or project if you receive project support? Number 2 is a great opener to get more money in the future, right? Because what do you consider to be the greatest strengths of your work? We can talk about that all day, but this part, what do you consider to be the most important concerns currently facing your organization? A concern could be that, without saying that you need more money, is that there is a high demand for my services and my project and my program. There's a high demand because of XYZ that we hope in the future to accomplish. So you're not telling them you need more money to do it, but you're saying that there's a demand, and obviously you're the ones that know how to do this, so why not give you more money, right? And this also sets you up for asking for more money and higher funds the next year. That's a really good I like that one.
So that was actually going to be a question. After you submit the report,
Yeah.
when should you contact or reach out for additional funding?
So I would say first off to look at their funding cycles and figure out where the report is due, what that date is based on the new application process. But if there are no dates that can kind of guide you, I would give them 3 weeks and then make sure you have some kind of confirmation that they received your report by email, whatever it may be. Once they have the report, then 3 weeks after, send them a grant application. I think 3 weeks is fair. But if you can align it with their board meetings, that's even better, right? So sometimes you kind of can get a gist of when that is based on when you've received emails from them. But if you can align it, like if you happen to know they have board meetings in October, it would be kind of cool if you submitted your grant request before then, right? So they can look at it at that board meeting. So it's usually better to try, if you can figure this out, try to submit new applications before the board meetings versus right after one is over, so to speak. It's also, if there's no dates as far as when all this needs to be submitted, it's always good to submit stuff earlier in the year versus later in the year, because by then the money runs out. But I would say 3 weeks after confirmation that they've received it is a good time frame to send them a new new application, new request.
This is just a small detail.
Sure.
Considering that I haven't been asked what exactly to report on, for that example, is it better to just put little subheadings for like challenges and then talk about it, or is it better to write the question and then answer it?
I don't like the writing of the question. I think
I
it
don't,
looks
I don't
terrible.
either. Yeah.
I don't think it looks good. I think if you're, that's a very good question. I'm really glad you actually asked that, because I say the questions are great to answer, but to write the questions and then it isn't just good writing. So I would say, like you said, just have a header challenges, and try to keep the headers short, 3 words or less. Yeah. This is cool. I'm starting to think about I studied English for my undergrad. Starting to remember all those tools.
I know, this is making me, I'm going back to school. I'm like, okay.
You're gonna be a student forever if you get into grants, because it's literally like fancy proposal writing. Fancy essay writing. It's almost the same. I'm gonna show you something else that I have here. Let's see if I can. This is actually a decent. I don't know if I can open it. This is an interesting looking report. Oh man, it just disappeared. I just saw one. Well, let's use this one. Something like this is not, I don't know if everybody can see it. It's kind of small. Something like this, I mean, again, this is for profit, but these type of 1-page, high level, details is actually not a bad idea. And I'll put it in the chat too, so you can see this. But this is very common in the for-profit world, to give a 1-page summary of what you're doing. This is also very useful for grant reporting. So if you have a funder and they're not giving you a lot of details, you may want to you could just send them this. I feel like a more explanatory report might be better, but this is something you can use. This is something you can also use. This is actually a really good tip. So let's say you complete a grant program, you submit the 5-page document we're talking about, right? It's visually appealing, it's really pretty, you have your infographics, your statistics, all this stuff. So you can then use that same document to create something like this. And then this is something that you can send as an attachment, as like complimentary information to other funders that you're interested in. So that's the cool thing about grants. Let's say you get a grant from Foundation A, you do your report, you submit it, and then now you want to approach Foundation B and C. You can use this summary to approach them. And for that case, something like this that's more visually appealing would be useful. So I have one client that's exactly what we do. He preps these really nice looking reports, and then he has these 1-page documents like this. And then we use that every year. So that way the information that's being given to new funders, to create those new relationships, is current information based on a successful ending of a previous grant. So yeah, that's another thing that I would, recommend doing. And there's a lot, there's tons of templates, but I would say use Canva. Canva's free or cheap. Where
are you sourcing all of this from? Is there a specific website?
This was literally Google. I just threw this in Google, and we're on a website called slideteam.net. But it's titled 1-page budget breakdown summary. So 1-page summary, you can look up grant. What I looked up was grant reports PDF. And you're gonna see, like I said, this very much comes from the for-profit world, but this is really good as far as visual. See, like even something like this is great. You can create your own little infographic, where you were at the beginning of the project, where you ended up at the end of the project, and show a visual. The other thing that's interesting about this is that, when it comes to education theory and how people learn, right? We all know this, right? There's different ways people learn. There's visual, there's audio, kinesthetic. I'm kinesthetic personally. So there's different ways that people learn, right? Just as individuals and students learn different, the funders have to understand what you're doing. You want to speak to them on an emotional level, an intellectual level, and each person, depending on who's reading it, is going to absorb the information differently. So if you can provide them with something that's visually appealing, that might cause like one funder to really say, wow, this is really great. You know what I'm saying? It's another way to like capture their attention, especially ones that are doing this all the time and reading through reports. It gets boring. So if you can incorporate some kind of visual element to it, I think it's going to be super useful. Not to the point where the content isn't strong. Content needs to be strong. And then after that, you're adding in your visual elements.
I have a question.
Sure.
I've been writing for nearly 30 years, and I've written for a laundry list of some of the biggest brands in the world. And everything that they do to establish themselves at the top of their industry or be near the top of it always is to brand themselves in a very emotionally connective way. Is that the kind of content that they're looking for? Like emotionally driven, or is their desire really more statistical, in fact, because they're parting with their money and they want to see what it's spent on, or is it some hybrid? How do you write that?
I would say it's a hybrid, and and how do you determine which way to go? It's going to be based on who your funder is. And I resonate with what you're saying, because I see it in work, and also I did my master's in communications and marketing, right? So we bring a lot of those concepts into this side of things. Like I try to bring a lot of for-profit concepts into the nonprofit world, and depending on who your funder is, you're going to do both, right? So the emotional appeal is super useful for your foundations a lot of times, especially your smaller family foundations. They're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. Now you start getting into the Miami Foundation, that's more Miami-Dade County, and they're wanting to look at a little bit more numbers and statistics. Now we bounce into the banks that are giving money. They only care about numbers. They can care less about emotions. How many people did you serve? Because if I gave you $100,000 and you served 1,000 people, that's X number of dollars per person. Not a good investment. Now if I give you $100,000, you serve as 100,000 people. Now I have a good investment. So depending on who your funder is, they're going to have a different level of information they want to see, and that's where you have to adapt it to what they need. The government is more technical. They want to see numbers. They want to see statistics. But they're also going to give you a lot of information. They're going to tell you what they're looking for. So just give it to them the way that they ask for it. There's literally no creativity in that. Not that it's bad. I like it. I actually like to throw grant writing, but there's not a lot of creativity. They would not necessarily want to see a lot of visuals. So Children's Trust, right? Children's Trust may not give you the opportunity to include visuals versus your other organization that you had mentioned, Duke may, right? So you gotta kind of play with it that way. The smaller the organization, the more emotional. The larger the organization, the more numbers is what I would say.
Okay.
Good question. Love it.
Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I wonder if you've heard, and there's actually a group at the center who does these impact edition. They gave a presentation a few months ago, and they were talking about having an impact report, and it's very similar to your like one page kind of snapshot of your organization to send to funders. And I'm curious, like if you were reaching out to a new funder, would you send that and a letter of inquiry, or like would you hope that the impact statement or your pretty one-pager overview gives them an idea, or like would it be weird to send both? Or
I would send both. Honestly, I would send both, because I feel like the letter of intent is going to be similar to your impact report. But like you say, it's pretty similar to what I'm talking about also. I would say send both, because what I like about this one pager, which maybe is kind of similar to impact report, is it's hyper focused on a program that was funded and that was successful. So instead of looking at the impact of your whole organization, we're saying we got this $40,000, this is what we did with it, right? So it tends to be a little bit more focused. So, but I would send both, one visual and one like LOI that's written. I think it's totally appropriate unless they say not to. But yeah, I would say that would be really good. And if it's something that's digital, like if it's an online portal and there's a place to put video, sometimes they will allow you to upload videos and things like that, then that would be great, right? You can upload a video about what you're doing because then you get that visual piece in there, right? But yeah, I would say both is good because you also look more professional. You also look more professional. I kind of like Greg was mentioning, you know, it's that whole marketing piece, right? Like how is it, you know, you want to have a brand that's emotionally driven. That's, you know, also psychology, right? So having that something that looks professional can help, makes you, you know, look more serious.
Well, when I told you I was new to this space because, and I needed to know that because when it comes to purchases by consumers or businesses, that's 100% emotionally driven. The numbers
Yep.
numbers have nothing to do with any logic, and all of that stuff doesn't really have anything to do with it.
Right.
But when someone's donating or funding a nonprofit, I was figuring that maybe it would be different because they're parting with their money and they want to know where it is. And it's more I guess to some degree, the business end of it,
Right.
as opposed to the,
Exactly.
you know, it's a relationship, but they're on the business side of it, it appears from what you said.
Exactly. Yep. And they want to make sure the investment they gave is a good investment, that the money was used appropriately. And then how do you define that? Based on how they define impact. So like your impact report, like Sarah was mentioning, is great. The only time that could work against you is if the way they define impact and the way you're defining impact is different. And each funder is going to define impact differently. So there is a kind of a level to it that is numbers driven. And that's why I like to see when I look at reports or when we do reports, if possible, I like to see both. Like, let's put in numbers, let's put in dollar signs, let's put in visuals, let's put in the anecdotal stories to capture them emotionally. Let's give them a little bit of everything when possible, because because sometimes you just don't know what they're looking for. And when you don't know, you know, you don't want to only give them emotional and there's no numbers and they're like, yeah, we can care less about this, or only give them numbers and no emotional. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes also the reviewers of these grants is not one person, and sometimes it's not even a person that's within the organization. It could be somebody external. So you're dealing with a player now that you have no idea who they are. The federal government's that way. The ones that review their grants are not federal employees. A lot of times these are people. Let's say it's a criminal justice grant, it might be a police officer. Or it's an education grant, it might be a teacher, right? So you don't really know who's reviewing it. So in order to kind of find a way to communicate to whoever it may be, try to incorporate a little bit of everything is what I would say. Interesting, it's fun.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, if anybody has any other questions, I'm here. Otherwise,